Hey, welcome to the Career Brand Story podcast, where we talk about your career, your brand, and your story. I'm Jeremy Tudor, the career strategist, brand marketer, and storyteller that created the Career Brand Story method that has helped thousands of job seekers craft their career brand story for today's job market and land their dream job. It's really great to have McKay Leslie, project manager, with us here at Career Brand Story. And as always, Jeb, what's cool about having you two is that this is like back to our very first podcast.
Oh,
and McKay,
yeah.
You've been absent for a while. Yeah.
I'm glad to be back today. This is some good stuff we're going to get into.
I know. So you need to stop going to school. You need to stop getting engaged because she's getting married in September.
Oh, my goodness.
And, and just focus more on your work, I think.
I'll work on it.
Wait, do you have a date set, McKay?
I do, and I can't say it here because then everyone that listens to the podcast, the thousands of people will come.
That's true.
Oh.
All right. You can tell me offline.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see it on the calendar. It's hearted.
It is hearted on our calendar.
Oh.
Yep.
But yeah, it's good to be here today, and I'm really excited to be back on the podcast. We've been putting out some really cool stuff with guests, but it's fun to do a little in-house episode.
All right. In all seriousness, McKay actually has been working really hard, getting her master's in divinity with a concentration in Christian care and counseling. And this last semester has been doing a chaplaincy residency at a hospital. And so she hasn't had every opportunity to just jump on the podcast with us as she had in the past. So again, it's great to see you again.
Thank you. I'm excited for this episode in particular because I feel like the skills that I'm learning to hone in pastoral care kind of intersect with business expertise in the area of conflict and conflict management and what it means to approach conflict in a healthy way, either personally or professionally. So I'm excited to kind of have this conversation with you. Listeners, if you've been listening since the beginning, you'll know that Jeremy and I are both Enneagram 8s.
What?
I know. You can't tell by the amount of times we interrupt each other or the abrupt nature of our conversation.
I'm just thinking about this whole morning. So what people don't know is that we had technical difficulties today, which sometimes happen. And we've spent an hour. And so we have 2 8s. And then we have Jeb, who's a 9. And he's totally cool, chilling.
Cool, calm, and collected over there.
And we are like trying to vibe down our intensity.
We were just raging from the technical difficulties. Also, the irony is that we were so prepared this morning before we hopped on the call with Jeb.
So prepared.
Yesterday, we had an interview with someone and we were talking about how we never have technical difficulties because Jeb's the best. And then the technology gods just rained on our parade this morning.
Yeah, I feel like I have to jump in here and not say Jeb's still the best, but the technology issue was out of my hands. It was a software issue that I've got to get in touch with the company about. And
it is not Jeb's fault, dear listeners.
Yeah. And part of my calmness is not just that I'm an Enneagram 9 and I don't like conflict, but that this is also what I do for a living. So it's just how things go. You just don't get too upset about these things. And when you've done it a million years.
Yeah. So we've kind of themed these our quarters through the year as we kind of journey through 2021. And we've subtly talked about this in other podcasts and asked our guests around this question about embracing tension, because tension does happen in every great story. In fact, I think for you to actually experience growth, you have to go through tension. And that's just a reality of life. Conflict is going to happen.
Yep.
And so, McKay, that was something that you've worked through and experienced a lot as you went through your residency and worked with just a lot of different personalities and a lot of different people. And we've experienced conflict on our team.
Yeah.
That's not, we're not just all like laughing and, joking all the time. Sometimes we're like, yelling and throwing stuff at no, we don't do that either.
Yeah, no, I think that like every relationship will have conflict, whether you choose to address it or not. And I think if you don't know much about the Enneagram, Christy, our Enneagram guide, has talked about this, I think on episode 20. So you can learn actually about 8s and 9s in that episode if you're interested. But just because we're confrontational by nature, powerful, that kind of thing, decisive, willful, doesn't mean that we like conflict. It's taken me a long time to really be comfortable with conflict. And in my recent chaplaincy internship, I've really learned about embracing that side of things, embracing that side of relationships. I think that, chaplaincy has taught me about patient interactions, but it's also taught me about myself as a care provider and about how I handled situations. And I learned actually that I tend to avoid conflict with other people, especially with my superiors. So I kind of put my big girl panties on this last year and decided to remain curious about what the people that I was in conflict with were thinking or feeling. And I did a little crazy thing, which was go and ask them what they were thinking and feeling. Be curious about where they were in the conflict that we were experiencing. Hey, this happened. I was wondering if you could tell me about your experience of the situation, those kinds of conversations. And I can tell you that staying curious has really been transformational for me, and probably the main way that I've been embracing tension recently, because it's so easy to avoid conflict or gossip or push it under the rug, which when we avoid conflict, we're not actually avoiding it. We're just putting it in another location for it to grow and grow and grow and come and bite us later. But I think that really approaching it takes more bravery to embrace tension in a situation, lean in and ask that other person, what was your experience? What am I missing? Can you tell me, part of your perspective? That is what really takes that openness and courage. And like you said, Jeremy, conflict is part of life, whether it's professional or interpersonal. So I think that we need to learn how to navigate it in a healthy kind of way. I think one part of that is not taking things so personally. And Jeremy, you were reading about this recently, right?
Yeah. So I've been reading a book recently I read called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel. How do you say his last name?
Ruiz.
And so it's a really kind of like easy read. You could probably read it in just a couple of hours. But one of the things in there is that you don't take things personally. So I've really leaned into that, especially over, I would say, the last year and a half of, in my own growth about not doing that. And then the second thing is that you don't make assumptions. And those two things right there have really helped me actually manage even conflict better. And I think our team would recognize that as well. So when we talk about something and something comes up that may even be directed towards me, whether it's in my leadership style, managing, or opinion, what it does for me mentally is it allows me, because I'm deciding I'm not going to take personally, what McKay says or what Jeb says. I'm not going to make an assumption. It allows me to actually listen in a better place and really listen to what the person is saying to me, and then think about, okay, how do I feel about this and how do I need to respond? And I think too often when someone comes with us with conflict, we think that the problem, is with us as a person. And, going back to McKay will understand where this came from, but seldom the issue, it's not always with us as a person. There's usually something else that can be going on along with it, because as people, we're complex and there's stresses and there's things going on, and thinking about where we're at, in our current culture and everything that we've gone through over the last year. And as people head back to the office, companies can't get away with just trying to, and I've been saying this for a couple of weeks, you can't just get away with ignoring the personal part of people's lives.
Right.
And then expect them to come into the workplace with like no stress going on. And then, wondering why that person might be blowing up, or the work isn't, done maybe to the same level of standard that maybe they were before. And that's, again, where the conflict starts to boil up, and then people take it very personally, and it just kind of goes from there. And
they lash out against one another, I think, in those situations, instead of realizing that it's not you against the other person. It's you and the other person against whatever the problem is. I think that when we can depersonalize issues like that and stay curious about all the sides of the problem and not make assumptions about the other person, not take what they're saying personally, then I feel like some healthy conflict can start to happen in our relationships, whether it be, in the office, in interpersonal relationships, whatever the context is.
Yeah. And I call that healthy dissension, right? There's nothing wrong with disagreeing with one another. And having, and I think, look, as a culture, we right now, things are just, it's like you have to be on one extreme or the other. We've forgotten how to actually disagree with one another, and still actually love one another at the end of it. And so there is a need for healthy dissension, because that, I think, on teams, when you have that, actually leads to better creativity and innovation. And quite frankly, just team bonding when you come on the other side of that. And we don't practice that enough with one another. We take things way too personally. And I think we make those assumptions. We fill in the blanks. We start doing that for people and start filling in the blanks before we've allowed people to actually talk it out. And say exactly what they're feeling and what they're thinking. So, conflict's going to happen. I mean, you're not going to avoid it. It's going to happen. I've had conflict with both you all.
You have?
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually, it's funny that you said that, but I have thought about that, because I thought, well, Jeb and I've known each other for a lot of years. Our conflict, I don't think actually, with both of you, I've never had conflict where like I walked away and thinking, like we've yelled at each other,
right?
Or we're not going to go get tacos afterwards, but we have had conflict.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Right?
That's true. Yeah, I can think of a few times.
At our annual meeting last year, we had conflict, and we took a breath and talked about it.
Yeah. And that's a really good example, because I think in that type of situation, like when that kind of conflicts happen in a team, a lot of people just avoid it. And I didn't allow us to avoid it. I said, we got to talk through it,
yeah, I think, you have to work with the other people in the conflict to find a time that's good for everyone to talk about it, because I think in that situation, it did work. We were all ready to talk about it, but sometimes someone will bring up a conflict or an issue, and you're just walking into the office and you're just putting your things down, and, someone comes in and says hey, we need to talk about this timeline that, we need to get on the same page or whatever. And you're just I haven't even had my second cup of coffee yet, whatever. I think it's good to think through, what kind of boundaries you can set for yourself around conflict, because if that's not a good time or place for you, if you're not in the right headspace, if you are tired or still too upset or whatever the case may be, it might not be the right time for you to talk through that conflict. So I like to call them back pocket phrases, having a back pocket phrase, prepared in your mind, right? Because this person's going to come in and say, we need to talk. having that phrase prepared, like, hey, I think it would be great for us to talk. Is there any way you could talk at this time on this day? And that way you're still honoring, yes, we need to talk about this. Yes, you're correct. Yes, there's an issue. But right this second might not be the best time for me to get into it with you or for us to, figure out a solution together. So I think it's really important, just because we're saying conflict is healthy doesn't mean it's always healthy to have conflict in every moment. There are times and places for it where we need to be kind of in a good space to have those conversations, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And to the point, though, also that healthy conflict is healthy. Like, there's still toxic conflict. There still are things that aren't going to be solved that you have to kind of walk away from. They can't be swept under the rug, but you're left to deal with them on your own. And that is a good time to go back to that first thing that Jeremy was talking about not taking it personally. Because, as my therapist continues to remind me, it's never about you.
Yeah, because I imagine that I have some people that I've dealt with, business and personally, that may think that I've avoided conflict, but I've actually just placed healthy boundaries in place. And a particular situation that I think about, I was talking to my wife, Christy, about it. And I said, look, because I think there comes a point where you've got to value yourself in any relationship. And, I realized in one particular relationship that I've been dealing with that I have valued myself over and over again. And I've always been the one who's like, brings things back, reconciles things, makes things feel kind of like normal. But it's like the illustration I used with Christy when I was talking to her about it. I said, but it's like putting your hand in a rose bush, like, I think like if the peace is kept and everyone's just fine and we never really talk about the issues, because the other party doesn't really want to talk about the issues. It looks lovely on the outside, but you put your hand in that rose bush and you get cut by thorns.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think it's really hard for me to lose relationships. I'm not the kind of person that does cut off in relationships at all. And so knowing that boundary of when is enough and when is trying to work through it causing more harm than health, that's a really hard boundary for me to figure out. Jeb, do you have any ideas on how you figure out when to walk away?
I don't. I am not helpful there because, it really is situational.
Yeah.
That's why he's been my friend for so long. He can't walk away.
And it doesn't have to be situational. If you have boundaries that really align with your values, you can always keep checking back and saying, like, is this relationship aligning with my values? And then you can know. But, it can be really hard because, like Jeremy said, you can still love people without having to be putting your hand in the rose bush. So it's tough to know when that cutoff is, but.
Well, and I think that and I was talking to a friend about this, and they came back with, I thought, just a really great advice about this. And and I would say this is around friendships, that we're never prepared to break up with friends. Like you do that in romantic relationships when you're first dating and stuff, like, that like a breakup could happen. Mm-hmm. But in friendships, like, you never walk into that relationship thinking, oh, one day we just won't be friends,
Yeah.
And so I don't know that mentally we just kind of prepare for that. The other thing is, and I think social media does a disservice to us on this, is that we now live in this world where it's possible for us just to be in each other's lives or a picture into each other's lives like 24/7, even if that isn't the actual reality of our lives.
Yep.
And so I've actually unfollowed different people because that is a boundary that allows me to actually think better of that person.
That makes sense.
But I know those people don't understand. They actually take a personal offense that I've unfollowed them, or that I'm not, I haven't unfollowed them, that I'm not, interacting or engaging with them through social media. And so again, that's taking something really personally and not realizing, oh, that's just actually a healthy boundary that he's putting in place for himself so that we actually can still maintain a good relationship.
Right.
And so circling all the way back into like conflict, like, this is where, I just don't know that as much as, I guess what I'm trying to say is that sometimes in conflict, the other person is just not open to actually want to sit down and hear what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in that situation, I think you have to have a healthy boundary and value yourself and know when to quit.
Right.
Yeah, that's certainly what I was referring to when I mentioned that sometimes there is no resolution other than, dealing with it
Walking
on your
away.
own because the person is just blind to it or doesn't have the capacity to work it out or whatever. And you just kind of have to take it on and realize that it ain't about me.
Yeah. The other thing that I really struggle with in interpersonal conflict is like not like once the conflict has happened, once the conversations have taken place, not harboring bitterness towards that relationship inside myself. And one trick that I have, which I don't know how effective it is, but one thing that I like to do is think about what myself in 10 years would do and try to do that and kind of like live up to a higher version of myself in that, because I think that it's so easy to talk through something and it doesn't go exactly how you wanted it. And you don't get like quite the apology that you were expecting or whatever the case may be. And we walk away with this bitterness and we think, oh, well, I handled that conflict, but then you're left with the bitterness. And it's like, did you really handle it? Or did you just have it take another shape inside of you? So I think one thing that I'm working through currently is like figuring out, okay, once the conflict has happened, how do I become at peace with that and move forward with it and not, allow that situation to like harbor resentment inside of me towards that person or towards that situation or towards that team or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. So I think too that like one of the challenges for me in that is that if I've had conflict and it's resolved, but I've made a decision that it's better that we don't continue to engage in the relationship, whether that's personal, business, or whatever, how do you continue to have, relationships when you encounter them along the way?
Yeah.
If you're in the same community, if you're still working with that person, and that's when I go back to, I really loved the back pocket phrases that you talked about. And because McKay, you and I were talking about that one afternoon as we were dealing and talking about a particular conflict, and you're like, you just need to have some back pocket phrases. And I love that, just some go-to kind of phrases that I can say and pull out, even if I encounter that difficult person again. If I'm in the workplace and I've talked to Joe many times and look, Joe and I are just not going to get along. We're not going to be best buds. We're not going to lunch together. Having a back pocket phrase that I can pull out and keep things professional and still find ways to work and collaborate within whatever environment I'm in. I think that that's really smart.
Absolutely. And I think that with the back pocket phrases, it's almost a favor to your future self, because if okay, I'm going to this party or I'm going to this happy hour at work, or, well, we don't go to parties or happy hours much anymore, but you catch my vibe. If you know you're going to run into this person, you can save yourself that social anxiety, that internal panic a little bit of like, oh, what do I say? What do I say? By just coming up with something. And it's protecting your own emotional energy, and it's protecting your future self, because you know, okay, if I see Joe, this is what I'm going to say, and I'm going to say it with confidence and kindness, and we're going to just move on.
Yeah.
So Jeremy, can we talk for a second about how companies can create safe environments for their employees around conflict?
Yes. So I have really grabbed on to the idea of psychological safety.
What is that?
So psychological safety is the belief that one can speak up without risk of like punishment or humiliation. And, you know, there's not going to be any retaliation because they've shared something. And it's been well established. This is Harvard Business Review wrote this, that it's been well established as a critical driver of high quality decision making, healthy group dynamics in interpersonal relationships, greater innovation, and more effective execution in organizations are the ones that actually put into practice psychological safety. And I never really thought about that even as a manager, like I have in leading my own team now today, because I think psychological safety takes in consideration the whole person. And again, we try to separate business and personal all the time, and you just can't do that.
You can't.
You have to take in consideration what's going on personally. So last night I just watched this TikTok of this mom who had an interview, and you know, she didn't have childcare because she's coming out of the pandemic, you know, and things were messed up, and she didn't know how she was going to make the interview. And so she called the place that she was interviewing with, the company, and kind of explained the situation. And they're like, oh, well, we're kid friendly. Just bring your toddler to the interview. And so it was really cute. She dressed him up in a suit, like a seersucker suit, and had him make a little resume and had this whole little TikTok video and went in for the interview and everything. But how many companies are doing that?
Yeah.
You know, how many companies even think about doing that? And especially when we have right now, we know the statistics that we talked about this on our last podcast, episode 30, with Susan Lamont from Exacquio, that women are at a disadvantage and have lost more job and opportunities, and especially if you're a single parent.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think that, you know, those type of creative and the TikTok video, in one of her comments, what she said is, I've never experienced such an authentic place. And I think that that's what people are really looking for, is knowing that, hey, this is a real place that cares about me as a whole person. And so I think managers have to start thinking about the psychological safety, that I can come into the place that I'm welcome, that I belong, that I can speak up. And guess what? Even when we disagree, even when we have conflict, I know we're going to work through it in a healthy way.
Absolutely. And I think one way that our team really creates a place of psychological safety for everyone is by not just talking about our values of openness and kindness and vulnerability, but actually practicing them. And I think the closer that a team is to alignment with their values, the more psychological safety there's going to be for the people within those companies. Because I think it's so, like you were talking about earlier, it's so easy to separate the person from the employee. But that it's dehumanizing. We are full, whole people at work and at home and at play. And I think when we forget that, when we see humans at work as just a machine that can get things done, I think actually it makes companies less productive. Whereas, like you're saying in the example of the TikTok video, they saw her as a whole person. She's a mom as well. And it made her experience with them, and I'm sure their experience with her, all the better for seeing her as who she is, not just as an employee, but as a human.
Yeah. And I mean, I think as people, we're not always on. You know,
right.
You know, but that's just impossible.
Well, and that's That's one way that I've started to handle things when things can be difficult. And I'm always talking about my therapist and my therapy, but here's another one from her is, when I'm getting down on myself, she'll ask me, like, would I talk to my son that way? I have a 5-year-old son, love him to death, of course. And, say, of course not. I wouldn't talk to him that way. And I also try to think about that with other people, that we are all just children who have grown into our adult bodies, but our inner mind is still thinking like a child so much of the time, that when I'm in a difficult, tense moment with somebody and I'm feeling the urge to lash back at them or write them off, I often remind myself, like, would I think about my child behaving this way in the same way? No, I would give them space. I would give them the benefit of the doubt. I would let them have a bad day, that kind of thing. And I think that's really helpful too, is just remembering that everybody is dealing with struggles all the time.
Yeah, I love that. And to contextualize that example for folks like me who might not have kids, when I'm frustrated with someone, sometimes I think about the person I look up to most in the world. And I think,
me?
Yeah, it's Jeremy. I think, wow, if Jeremy did this, how upset would I be? How would I react? Because we give different people, right, different levels of, with different levels of excuse or different levels of the benefit of the doubt. I
get you.
I got it.
Tripping over my words, but you get my vibe.
We've all got preconceived notions.
Someone. Yes. And so maybe someone that we think a little better of, what if they did that to me? How would I react? Maybe that's a way that folks without kids could think about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really great. It's kind of the illustration that came to my mind is like, again, little kids, but like when a baby's learning to walk, and falls, we don't like scream at the kid, like, get it together. You got 2 legs. What's your problem? We're encouraging like, oh, you can do it and stuff. And I'm not saying that, I don't want to be in there's a whole nother topic of like toxic positivity,
right? And we don't want to get walked all over either.
Yeah. That's ignoring, the realities and behaviors that do need to be addressed. But I think that all of us deal with way more negatives, that we need people, and especially our managers and or the people that we're working with, because we spend, again, an extraordinary amount of time with them. We need that place to be a place that we come into. Then when we leave at the end of the day, like, we're like, wow, that was a good day. We had that yesterday. Christy, McKay, and I were in the office working all day, and about 4:30, we were like, let's go get a sweet, and so we took off for a bakery, and, I think we ended the day thinking this was a good day. This was good. And not only did we get work done, but there was that relationship bonding, right? That we felt good about working with one another as well. And that is so important. To have that kind of those moments, more of those moments where you build the trust. So when the conflict comes, right, I'm in a better place to not take it personally. I realize like, well, if McKay has an issue, it's probably not with me. It's what we're working on. It's what's going on. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. And that
I'm going to throw, go ahead, Jeb.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I was just going to throw kind of a curveball question at you all. Listeners, this is unscripted.
Uh-oh.
What would you say to a person who is in a work environment where they feel like they always have tension? What do you have? And we've all been, right, in bad employment situations. Are there any tools that you have in your tool belt that you would give to someone who's like, yeah, this all sounds great, but how do I implement this when my entire team is in conflict, at all times?
I'd be getting in touch. I mean, I have a bias here, but I'd be getting in touch with you guys at the Career Brand Story and looking for another place to work. Seriously, if you are in that position and you have some self-awareness, some emotional intelligence, and you know, first of all, start with yourself. See, am I creating this? Am I making this up? When you determine that it's not you and that it's real and it's not what you want to do, that's where I'd be looking for a new job. Because that to me just becomes the toxic work environment. That's me. I don't know.
So I think that the first place I have to start is with myself, right? I have to recognize, like, why do I feel this tension? And, you know, is it something that I'm creating? You know, am I part of the reason why that tension exists? The second thing in a workplace that I think is really important is just understanding, as a part of understanding what could be causing the tension, is understanding how I work behaviorally and, you know, and what motivates and drives me, but also understanding what my values are.
Yeah.
Because where we have conflict in companies and the places that we work is because our personal values are not shared with the company's values. And so if there's, like, for me, this is just an arbitrary number that I've come up with, right? But for me, it feels like that if, like, 75% of my personal values are not affirmed in some way and shared with the company I'm working with, it doesn't matter how I work or what I do, I'm probably going to get frustrated.
Because that also means that your coworkers are okay with those values that the company has, right? And so then you're going to be malaligned with your coworkers as well.
Right. And I would say what happens probably in more companies than not is that they may have a mission statement and they may have values written up on a board, but they don't actually put them into action, right? And so, you know, you can have all the values you want all day, but if the leaders of that company are not actually leading out and practicing those values, you know, then it doesn't matter what you have written on the board.
Right.
So for me, that's the first starting point. And so if those things don't work, I agree with Jeb, you're probably sitting in a toxic environment, and that's a good sign that, you know, hey, it's time to exit. Now, if I evaluate those things and I realize, well, you know what, I do share the affirmed values and we do practice these, and, you know, and then start to realize, oh, well, you know, maybe I'm not practicing great emotional intelligence here. Maybe I am, you know, being part of that. That's self-awareness, and to recognize maybe I need to improve some communication skills. Maybe I am the one who's avoiding the conflict. Maybe I'm taking things way too personally. Maybe I'm making a lot of assumptions and I'm filling in all the blanks. You know, you need to work through that.
Yep.
And, you know, that's where a career coach is really good for you.
Yeah.
Specifically about career coaching. Now, if it's personal life stuff, go see a therapist. All right.
Yeah.
Because I go see a therapist and that's what they're for. But career coaching can be really good sometimes and give you that outside perspective. I had a client about a month ago called right after he had a phone conversation with a higher up, not his supervisor, but another higher up. And because he was so frustrated with his supervisor. And honestly, he was, from the conversations that he had, he was just so riled up by the whole thing that his fear was like, well, they're just going to fire me. So he called, we talked it through. And as he talked it through, like, it was clear, like, that's not even what they were thinking about. Like, his higher up realized, hey, there's conflict. We need to resolve it. And the higher up was even acknowledging that it was all more on the supervisor, not managing the situation well. They really valued his work. They want to make it work for him and find the right place for him in the company as well. And so I was able to talk him down and talk him through, like, here's how you need to respond to this. Instead, he had, I think, you know, typed out a pretty fiery email that he wanted to send to a supervisor. It's like, let's back off the edge before you do that, you know, and think about that. And so sometimes it's really good, again, just to have like that outside perspective that can help kind of talk you through that before, you know, and realize what part you own, and then how to go about actually handling, you know, the conflict, in a healthy way that actually brings, resolution.
Yeah. Yeah, I think definitely finding someone who is a confidant, whether that be a friend or career coach or therapist or whatever, to talk through a situation with you before you just go step into the conflict, I think can be really helpful to hear another perspective. And I think you got to be safe with that, because it can turn into gossip, or you got to find someone who really can keep confidence. But yeah, that's a great option for folks who don't know where to begin, is talking it through with someone else to find another perspective before they kind of approach the conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, this episode is sponsored in part by Enter Your Fellowship. Are you a college graduate or in college and at least 21 years old? Are you seeking to understand how to best participate given your unique gifts, talents, and desires? Maybe consider taking an intentional gap year to gain clarity. Enter Your Fellowship is accepting 21-22 applications. Let's close the gap together. You can apply today at enteryear.org/apply. All right, McKay, what's some of our main takeaways from this episode?
Yeah, I think you did a good job recapping, but I'll recap one more time. Bravely embrace tension and conflict. These can be our teachers. They can be our healers, but they take bravery to approach. Stay curious about other people rather than making assumptions. Don't take conflict personally, and don't make it about the other person. The problem is the problem. Creating a psychologically safe culture of openness and vulnerability at your company can allow for healthy conflicts on your team. And be sure to get those back pocket phrases ready when you're expecting a difficult interaction with someone and you need to set a boundary or give yourself a little bit more time. Those back pocket phrases can be really helpful. And sometimes boundaries aren't enough, and we need to walk away and take care of ourselves on our own. And so be diligent in finding what that balance is. Above all, have grace for yourself, because learning how to do conflicts is really difficult. And I think a lot of times in our culture, we don't have many good examples of it. And so have grace for yourself, because this is something that we're all constantly learning in and growing and working on. So I hope that these little tips and tricks have been helpful for you all, and that you've gotten something you can take away with you. If nothing else, I would just say be brave, because we can learn a lot about ourselves and other people when we enter into conflict in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I want to add one of my favorite books that I'm always pushing that deals a lot in this topic is Creativity, Inc. by Ed Catmull and Amy Wallace. Ed was the president of Pixar Animation, and the book really shines a light on their company's approach to candor and their culture of making the work about the work, so that they could have these psychologically safe conversations. You could go in and maybe before you worked there, you would have felt like you were getting ripped a new one, where when everybody's on board that it's about the work and feels actually confident and it's really about that, then you know that it's not you that's messed up. It's the work you got to fix.
Yeah. And I think people don't know, Brene Brown says clear is kind. And I think people don't know how to take clear communication sometimes. And we take it as attack when really it's just kind honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great book. I have it on my desk. I've been reading through it.
Good.
So, yeah. Well, hey, if you are listening to this podcast, I want to encourage you to go also watch it. So you can go over to careerbrandstory.com, our landing page. Little housekeeping. We're going to be changing our YouTube channel so that we just have a Career Brand Story YouTube channel. We'll let you know when that rolls out, because we want you to go subscribe. So if you're subscribing to jeremytutor.com, that's great. Keep doing that. There's going to be lots of videos that still come there, but we're eventually going to move some because I can't talk today. yeah, we're going to move some stuff around just to make it easier to navigate, get the information that you need around your career, your brand, and your story. But just stay tuned to the careerbrandstory.com website. You can go there, you can connect and either watch us on YouTube, or you can go and find the best platform for you to listen to this podcast. And so we love that. And, also comment back to us about things that you want us to talk about and things that you like. Create conflict with us, I guess. And
what do you hate about our podcast?
What do you hate about it? And we'll address those things, especially the haters. We'll definitely address those things in a horrible, bad way. No.
Yeah.
But so check that out. You can find me in most places on Facebook and LinkedIn. Just search for Jeremy Tudor. On Instagram, I'm at Jeremy T. Tudor. On TikTok, I'm at Jeremy Tudor. McKay, where can people find you?
Yeah, go to linkedin.com/McKay-Leslie and on Instagram at McKay Leslie.
All right. And Jeb, where can people find you?
At JebGraff, JEBBGRAFF on all socials, and jebgraff.com.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and keep thriving.
If you're interested in advertising your business on our podcast, we advertise for local and national companies. Contact McKay at careerbrandstory.com for more information. That's MCCAY at careerbrandstory.com.